بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is the 17th of Ramadan, the second year of the Hijrah, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims with him are meeting the non-believers in a decisive battle, the first major battle between truth and falsehood, between Islam and the pagans and those who were with them. They did not come requesting truth. They did not come except to avenge in arrogance and in falsehood. They came to kill the Muslims and to show them that they are insisting on associating others with Allah the Almighty and on defeating Islam. The Muslims had to fight, not for their lives, but for a just cause, to defend Islam, to defend Quran, and to defend the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were 314 men, lightly armed, while the mushrikun, while the polytheists were over 1,000, and they were heavily armed. The skirmishes began with a duel when Utbah and his brother Shaybah and the son of Utbah Al-Walid came out to fight, and the Prophet ﷺ sent 3 of his relatives, Ubaydah ibn al-Harith, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, to fight them, and they killed them. In seconds, 3 of the leaders of Quraysh were killed in front of the army, and then they could not withdraw themselves. They started to engage with the Muslim army. The Prophet ﷺ instructed his army not to draw their swords until they are at point blank range. He instructed them to throw them with arrows so that they would kill as many as possible before physical contact. And this took place. And the mushrikun, the polytheists, started falling in numbers. And they were scattered left, right, and center, while the Muslims were all fighting in one united row against the forces of evil. One of the companions, his name is Ukasha ibn Muhsan, he had a sword in his hand, and whenever he fought with that sword, it broke. So he took another one, and a third one, and a fourth one. He went to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet gave him a branch of a tree, and he shook it, and it became a steel sword second to none. And this is one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, Ukasha ibn Muhsan is different than Abu Dujana. And Abu Dujana, Simak ibn Kharsha, is a different man. We're going to talk about him in the Battle of Uhud and about his bravery. But Ukasha ibn Muhsan, he is the famous Ukasha in the famous hadith in Arabic, where we know that the Prophet said, Sabaqaka biha Ukasha. Ukasha was once at the Prophet ﷺ's gathering and the majlis, and he heard the Prophet say ﷺ that there will be 70,000 of my followers entering paradise without punishment and without questioning. And Ukasha immediately stood up and said, O Prophet of Allah, pray to Allah that I may be among them. So he said, you are among them. And this was not a grant or a gift from the Prophet ﷺ. He was told by Allah that Ukasha is among them. So another one stood up and said, oh, Prophet of Allah, let me also be among them. He said, the Prophet, well, Ukasha took the lead, and he's the only one that I was ordered to give the glad tiding. This Ukasha ibn Mahsan fought at the cause of Allah, not only on the Battle of Badr, but all throughout the battles of Islam, and he died 10 years later.
Shaykh, we can say the Prophet ﷺ engaged in many battles. Does this also prove his mercy to mankind in the defense of Islam?
Well, this is a manifestation of his mercy, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was not ordered to kill everyone, and he did not kill everyone. He took prisoners, and he did not even keep the prisoners in camps with, as we will hear inshallah, in poor standards of living. He did not torture them, he did not abuse them. He was a mercy because his mission was to get the people out of darkness into the light. And it is exactly like a doctor. When you have a patient, and this patient is crying, and he is in agony, in pain, if you come to this patient trying to help him, he would probably reject your help, because his condition and his physical pain prevent him from recognizing help when it's coming. If the doctor adheres to this rejection and goes, the patient is going to die. But at some point, the doctor has to use force. And the patient, after a week or two, after he is healed, he will recognize and appreciate the work that the doctor did. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ, his fightings were not to control people or to enslave them. His fightings and wars were not aimed to economical gain or political gain here or there. His fightings were only to get the people out of darkness into the light, to guide them to Islam. And that is why in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that I am wondering of people being pulled by shackles and chains to paradise. It's a matter of astonishment and wonder. Subhanallah, the Prophet is wondering, how do people get pulled to paradise against their will? And scholars explain this. They said this is exactly the case of those who fought the Prophet ﷺ, or fought Islam in general, and then they were prisoners of war. And while they were prisoners of war, they were non-believers, they were non-Muslims. And after a while, they embraced Islam after looking at the environment around them and at the behavior of Muslims. They liked Islam, so they reverted to Islam and they became Muslim. And they died as Muslims. So the main cause for them to enter paradise were those shackles and chains. So the Prophet is saying, subhanallah, they were non-Muslims and yet they were pulled to paradise against their will because they were prisoners of war. And that is why these wars were mercy to the world. The Prophet ﷺ was mercy to the world. He did not burn houses. He did not kill people. He and his forces never raped women. On the contrary, he was always instructing his soldiers not to harm a child, nor a woman, nor an elderly, not to harm a monk or a priest, not to destroy temples and houses of worship. So these are the rules of engagement that the Prophet ﷺ gave us and his companions.
And this is the difference between the Muslims when they are in the war, and you said they treat the prisoner like a good way, and they don't kill the children and this and this and this. And now, as if we look at the kuffar now, what they are doing in Iraq and Palestine, we can wonder, This is the difference between the Muslims and the kuffar.
Well, again, I do not like generalizing the issue. We cannot say that all non-believers are savage and they mistreat the Muslims.
Individuals, maybe.
Maybe individuals are there, but the trend, you have to look at the religion, at the belief. Our religion and our belief talks to us and tells you you're not allowed to do this. Now, if there's an individual who claims to be a Muslim and does otherwise, he should not be, or Islam should not be responsible for his action. Likewise, we cannot blame the Christians for atrocities because their religion does not call them to be so violent and to do such unlawful things.
But again, it does, what the brothers, it does seem like the war has many fronts, because if the Muslims, for example, one individual does something which Islam does not appreciate or promote him, then Islam together is with his bad action. But for example, in Palestine or some actions of some Western soldiers or anywhere in the world, their religion is not highlighted with this. So it does have a...
Yes, this is true. Unfortunately, whenever a Muslim does something, they don't mention his nationality or his race. So if a person from Yemen, for example, does something, they wouldn't say a Yemeni did. They would say a Muslim. If a Muslim from Chechnya did something, they would not say a Chechnyan rebel did this. They would say a Muslim terrorist. But whenever an American or a Britisher or European or an Indian or a Chinese who is a non-Muslim does something, or even an Israeli, you would never hear someone say a Jew did this. Like Goldstein, when he went into the mosque where the Muslims were praying, and he started shooting 30 or 40 dead of them while praying Fajr, morning prayer. Nobody said a Jew extremist. And they would say that, someone who was mentally ill. He's an Israeli, he's from the reserves, he's a soldier, but they never attach this to their religion, except Islam, so that people would have Islamophobia. People would fear Islam. Well, going back to the Seerah again, the battle now is taking place, and the Muslims and the pagans are fighting for their causes, each for their different and individual cause. We come to see that they are falling in numbers, great numbers, and not only small people, because those who came out were the leaders of Quraysh, and those who followed them were the elite of that city and that tribe. So it was an issue of honor, it was an issue of pride. They went with arrogance, with their wealth, with their women, with their slaves to play the music and chant and play the duf and tambourine and so on. So they had no idea what was going to face them. So the minute they started seeing people fall down, they started to scatter here and there. They just wanted to flee the battlefield. And only few remained fighting in defiance and in disbelief. This cannot be happening. This is a nightmare. Something has to change. And they stood in defiance, trying to change things, but it was inevitable that it was their death coming to them. I think we have a short break. Stay tuned, and inshallah we will be right back.
So this is an open invitation for everybody to recognize God and enjoy His blessings in this life and His mercy in this life and in the hereafter as well. Allah